I remember it all vividly. They say time dulls memory, but for me, every detail is as clear as that night when I first learned the truth. My name? Irrelevant. For 20 years, I've worn the mask of the kind, unassuming mother, biding my time, waiting for this day to come. 2 decades ago, my husband left me and our 3-year-old son for her, Sandra. She wasn't just any woman. She was someone who walked into our lives as a friend. We met in a parenting group, both young mothers navigating early motherhood, supporting each other through sleepless nights and endless laundry. I trusted her. I invited her into my home, my life. She was so effortlessly charming, so eager to lend a hand, that it never even crossed my mind she'd become a fixture in our lives for reasons far darker than simple friendship. Then, one summer evening, he sat me down, wearing that practiced mask of calm, and said he was leaving. I remember the pity in his eyes, the softness in his voice, how he tried to soften the blow for my fragile soul. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. What followed were years of careful patience, planning, and playing my part as the mother left behind. I poured myself into raising my son, molding him into the man his father never was. Strong, principled, compassionate. I knew that day would come when I'd get my chance to right this wrong, and I was willing to wait. 20 years isn't such a long time, not when you have purpose. Sandra reappeared last summer. Divorced, alone, and, dare I say it, desperate. My son had grown into a handsome young man. His father's charisma and my resilience combined into something beautiful. It didn't take her long to take notice, and she found reasons to call, to drop by. Her pathetic attempts at rekindling the past making me laugh. She had no idea I was watching, no idea I knew her every move. I let her think she was welcome, let her believe she could have him too, in her twisted, insatiable way. And my son? Innocent as he was, he didn't see her manipulations, her schemes. Not until it was too late. One evening, I watched her lure him to her place, watched as her wicked hands closed in, her sweet voice spinning lies. But this time, I was ready. I called the police, detailing with precision the nature of her relationship with my son, the kind of relationship that would destroy her reputation, her freedom. That night, as the police lights flooded her doorstep, she saw me standing there, watching as her life crumbled. 20 years of anger and pain erupted in a smile I hadn't worn in years. As she was led away in handcuffs, I whispered, 20 years, Sandra. I waited 20 years for this. The last thing she saw was the fire in my eyes, fierce, unbroken. Some might call it revenge. I call it justice. The fallout from Sandra's arrest rippled through our town like a stone dropped in still water. People gossiped, theories swirled, but few guessed the truth. Most saw Sandra as the misunderstood victim of circumstance, caught in an affair with someone half her age, tarnished by a mother's scorn. But I knew the story would eventually take hold. People would talk, find the threads of her history, piece together her reckless patterns. For my son, it was different. In the aftermath, he was shattered, blindsided by the revelation of Sandra's intentions. I saw the shame in his eyes, the pain of betrayal. He spent days in a haze, blaming himself, feeling used, his trust twisted into something ugly. But I was there for him. I held him through the tears, through the hours when he blamed himself, when he wondered if he could have prevented it. I told him he was blameless, that love and trust make us vulnerable, but never guilty. And gradually, he understood that. Weeks passed, and Sandra's case was built in quiet devastation. I attended every hearing, every cold courtroom session where her lawyer tried to paint her as the victim of circumstance, the wronged woman. But she knew better. I saw the hatred in her eyes as she sat across from me, hands clasped and controlled, but her gaze a firestorm of resentment. Her lawyer made her out to be a woman, haunted by loneliness, a victim of poor judgment, someone who fell for the young man because of his uncanny resemblance to the husband she once stole. I almost laughed at the absurdity. It was my patience, my plan, that had gotten her here. And even now, she didn't understand what she'd taken from me all those years ago. She saw nothing but her own pain, her own ruin. In the end, Sandra was convicted on charges that left her reputation in tatters, with the media painting her as a fallen figure of manipulation. The sentencing wasn't severe, but it was enough. She would lose her job, her place in society, her friends, all the things she once cherished more than loyalty or honesty. Her life, once so perfectly manicured, would be a barren landscape she'd have to walk alone. On the last day in court, as the judge read her sentence, Sandra caught my eye. There was no anger left in me, only a cold satisfaction as she realized finally who had orchestrated it all. I lifted my chin slightly, as if to say, I told you I'd wait. When the gavel struck, my son and I walked out of that courtroom together, his arm in mine. The sun was warm on our faces as we stepped into the light, free, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt like I could finally breathe. In the weeks after the trial, life settled into a quiet rhythm. My son began to heal, finding his way back to himself, understanding that Sandra's deceit had nothing to do with him. I watched him grow stronger, more resilient, and in those moments, I felt a peace that had evaded me for years. My purpose was fulfilled. The woman who tore my life apart was now a shadow of her former self, and I had my son back, free from her grasp. One afternoon, I returned to my garden, the place where I'd once sought refuge from the grief of betrayal. As I dug my hands into the earth, planting new seeds, I felt lighter, as if the years had fallen away. This garden had witnessed my pain, my quiet resolve, and now it would witness my peace. The townspeople moved on quickly. They forgot Sandra, forgot the trial. To them, she was a cautionary tale, a brief spectacle. But to me, she was a chapter finally closed. Now, my life was my own again, unshackled from the bitterness that had bound me for so long. I had waited 20 years for the revenge, but as I sat alone in the evening glow, I realized that it wasn't revenge that had freed me. It was justice. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in golden light, I allowed myself a small smile. Finally, I was ready to begin again. The seasons changed, marking the quiet passage of time as life returned to its natural rhythm. My son moved forward with a resilience I admired deeply, finding strength in his studies, his work, and in new friendships. Every so often he would look at me with that trace of vulnerability, as if still piecing together fragments of the trust that had been shattered. And every time, I met his gaze with steady reassurance. The bond between us was stronger now, fortified by the trials we had survived together. One late autumn day, I found an unexpected letter in my mailbox. Sandra, writing from prison. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper, the familiar handwriting twisting through words that seemed to search for understanding, even forgiveness. She described her loneliness, her regret, painting herself as the tragic victim of life's cruel circumstances. She claimed she had cared for my son, that her intentions had been misunderstood, that she was paying dearly for mistakes she barely recognized as her own. I read her letter twice, feeling no sympathy, only a hollow ache for all the years I'd spent, silently holding the pain she had caused. She asked me to visit. For what reason, I could only guess. Perhaps she wanted me to absolve her, to give her the peace she had denied me for so long. In the end, I tore the letter into tiny pieces and let them drift into the fireplace. Sandra's reach had ended. She was nothing more than a shadow in my past. As winter settled in, I watched the snowfall, blanketing the garden I'd tended through years of anger, patience, and now, finally, calm. I had weathered my own storm, and now, with each new day, I felt a little lighter, free to savor the life I had reclaimed. For the first time in 20 years, I was truly at peace. Months passed, and with spring came a sense of renewal, both in the world around me and within. My son had met someone, a kind, genuine woman who brought warmth back to his life. Watching him with her, I felt a deep sense of pride. He had found happiness on his own terms, untarnished by the past. We no longer spoke of Sandra or the betrayal that had nearly broken us. We had silently agreed to leave her memory where it belonged, buried in the shadows. One evening he invited me to dinner, sharing the news that he planned to propose. I felt a rush of joy, a surge of hope for the future he deserved. In that moment, I realized I was free, not only from Sandra's betrayal, but from the weight of vengeance I'd carried all these years. It was time to let the past rest. That night, I returned to my quiet home, a place that had been both sanctuary and battleground, and looked around with new eyes. The rooms felt lighter, as if they too had been freed from the grip of old memories. The ghosts that had lingered in every corner were gone, leaving only warmth and a gentle silence. With a steady hand, I opened my journal, something I hadn't touched in years. I wrote about forgiveness, not for Sandra, but for myself. I forgave the woman I had been, the one who had hurt, who had waited, who had planned. She had done what she needed to survive, to protect her family. But now she could rest, her purpose fulfilled. Into the months that followed, I found a new path. I took up painting, losing myself in colors and canvases, creating a world only I could see. The ache of the past faded, replaced by the beauty of the present and the quiet joy of simple moments. At last, I had let go, and as I stood by my son's side on his wedding day, watching him promise his life to a woman who cherished him, I knew that life had given me something far richer than revenge: peace, family, and a future no longer bound to the past. Years flowed by quietly, each one gentler than the last. My son and his wife welcomed their first child, a little girl with wide eyes and a laugh like bells ringing. Holding my granddaughter for the first time, I felt something inside me heal completely. This child was new, untouched by the burdens that had once weighed so heavily on me. She would only know love, peace, and warmth. She would inherit none of the darkness I had carried. In her, I saw a fresh start, a new line in our family's story. I began visiting them more often, drawn to the life they had built together, watching as my son became the father he never had, growing up. He had broken free from the cycle of hurt and betrayal, and I watched with pride as he gave his daughter a home filled with laughter and love. Every Sunday, I would bring over something special: flowers from my garden, a freshly baked pie, or a knitted blanket. Little by little, these simple gestures became our family's traditions, quiet rituals that connected us across generations. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch with my granddaughter on my lap, she reached up to touch my face with her tiny hands, her curious eyes studying me as if she could see beyond skin, beyond time. "You're my Nana," she whispered, the words soft and pure. I held her close, feeling the weight of her trust, her innocence, and for the first time, I understood what true freedom felt like. I was no longer the woman who had waited 20 years for justice. I was a grandmother, a mother, a woman fully healed. The ghosts of the past had dissolved, leaving only echoes that faded with each gentle breeze. The anger, the bitterness, even the satisfaction of seeing Sandra's downfall, it all felt like another lifetime. This life, with its quiet mornings and soft laughter, was all I needed. In the twilight of my years, I found solace in the ordinary beauty of every day. The past no longer held power over me. I was finally whole, content to live out the days that remained surrounded by the love I had waited so long to reclaim. As the years turned into decades, the past became a distant memory, softened by time and overshadowed by the beauty of a life rebuilt. My granddaughter grew into a remarkable young woman, and she often sat with me on the porch, listening intently as I shared pieces of my life's story, the parts that mattered: love, resilience, and the power of forgiveness. She knew nothing of Sandra or the darkness that had once haunted our family. Those details were mine to carry, and mine alone to release. One spring morning, she looked at me with that same searching gaze she'd had as a child. "Nana," she asked, "how did you stay so strong all these years?" Her question lingered in the air, simple but profound. I thought carefully before answering, realizing that this was the moment I could finally distill everything I had learned, everything I had endured. I took her hand, feeling the softness of youth in her palm. "Strength doesn't come from holding on to pain," I told her, my voice steady. "It comes from letting it go. Forgiveness, true forgiveness, means setting yourself free." She smiled, understanding in her eyes, and in that instant, I felt as if my life had come full circle. The wounds that had once defined me had healed, leaving only faint scars as reminders of a past overcome. As I watched her walk back into the house, laughter trailing behind her, I felt an overwhelming peace. I looked out over my garden, where flowers bloomed wildly, colors dancing in the sunlight. This life I had built, this quiet sanctuary of love, was my final act of triumph, my legacy. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the sun fill me, and whispered to myself, "It is finished." The story was no longer one of vengeance, but of rebirth, and as the breeze gently rustled the leaves, I knew that I had truly, finally, found peace.